Bank manager's reaction to this kid's account will leave you speechless. The camera of the mind closes in on a pair of thrift store shoes. The rubber is smooth where the sole has rubbed thin. A faint strip of duct tape holds the heel in place. Dust clings to the scuffed leather in the grooves, the kind of dust that remembers rain and schoolyard gravel. The lobby beyond those shoes is all marble and brass, pale stone that reflects a dozen polished shoes and the glint of a chandelier. The teller line is a measured hum of small talk and the keystroke rhythm of transactions nobody thinks about until the moment it becomes a story. Wesley Brooks is 10 years old. He stands a little under the brass counter's line of sight, clutching a tiny plastic card and a folded brown envelope stained at one corner with something that looks like tea. His shoulders are straight in the way his grandmother taught him, quiet backbone instead of loud voice. He clears his throat softly, the sound swallowed by the lobby's echo. "Excuse me," he says, "I need to check my account." The man behind the counter, who calls himself Bradley Whitmore, looks up from a stack of paperwork. He is 45, a bank manager by reputation and habit, and he has worn his authority like an expensive cufflink for 15 years. His suit fits like a shield. For Bradley, the world fits into authorized names, polished resumes, and customers who arrive in town cars and speak with the practiced cadence of transaction. A 10-year-old in thrift shoes is, in that taxonomy, an anomaly and a problem. Bradley leans forward until his face fills the small space between Wesley and the glass. "Sir," he starts. "I'm not a sir," the boy says, because he has been taught to be precise. He holds his card up, palms steady. "I'm Wesley. My card. Check it, please." There is a pause, a space like a held breath that ripples out through the waiting customers. Someone at the wire-haired tax counter snorts a laugh. A woman in a designer coat looks down at Wesley as if he were a child who erred in public. Bradley's smile is thin and automatic. "We don't serve," he says, choosing a word that pinches, "unaccompanied minors for account access." He produces the policy as a dagger. "You'll need an adult." Wesley opens the brown envelope then, not to produce anything dramatic, but because the letter inside is a map and he needs to feel it in his hands. The handwriting inside is old and confident. His grandmother's looped letters, the way she put little hearts on the eyes like they were small gifts. He breathes in the paper, the smell of his grandmother's perfume and boiled sugar and nights where she folded laundry while humming hymns. He has been rehearsing what to say. He does not cry, he does not beg. "I have permission," he answers simply. "Grandma left it to me. She put the letter and the card together. She said I could come and check it when I was old enough to be responsible."
You're not old enough," Bradley interrupts. He uses the word responsible like a glove he can slip onto his hand. "And this is not the place for a show. If you're trying to scam," the word scam lands hard and goes microsecond viral in the room. A laugh bubbles up, a cluck of disapproval. A phone camera just out of frame finds a face and angles to capture the moment. Chelsea Morrison, the teller with the neat bun and the name tag that reads like a script, gives Wesley a look of official pity. She moves to the side, folding her arms as if she is shielding herself from a spill. No one speaks up. Not Jerome, the security guard, who keeps his gaze trained on the revolving door as if the danger is always outside. Not Diane Campbell, who coughs into her hand and shifts her paper cup from one hand to the other, the liquid sloshing like a metronome. They watch, those who watch, and in their watching there is a small, often unnoticed cruelty, the choice to let a single person become a public lesson. Wesley's palms cool. He reads the letter once again, the words like a low hum at the back of his throat. "Carry your dignity as if it were the only thing they cannot take." Grandma Eleanor Brooks, had underlined that sentence 3 times. She had saved every spare dollar, giving up small comforts so a future could shine, not for herself, but for a boy who loved marbles and stories. The brown envelope includes a careful note of instruction. The manager's number, the bank branch name, a request that Wesley be permitted to verify his funds when he was ready. There is a harmless legalese in the margins, written by a lady who knew how to be precise without losing tenderness. "Do you have ID?" Bradley asks, voice carving out the last stare of dignity from under Wesley's feet. Wesley nods and slides a small laminated photo, a driver's license-sized portrait, made at the local photo kiosk, across the counter. It's worn at the corners, the glue soft from being carried in the pocket of a coat too big for him. Bradley inspects it like a jeweler inspecting a counterfeit stone. He taps a finger on the plastic, sends a message with that small private smile that says he knows who matters and who doesn't. "Call your guardian," Bradley says finally, and the words are not meant for Wesley so much as for the room. "Tell them to come in and verify. We have procedures." Wesley reaches for his phone, cracked across the corner like a healed scar, and fumbles for his uncle's number. He texts the single name he had memorized though never quite believed he would need: Lawrence. A minute scrapes by. The lobby's lights click and hum. People shuffle their documents and their faces. The barista line outside the glass door wraps like a small river of polished shoes. Wesley sits on a bench, too far from the marble, too close to the low plants the bank keeps as decor, and folds his hands around his envelope as if it were a talisman.
He repeats his grandmother's line in the recesses of his head, "Carry your dignity." Half an hour is a long time when your cheeks prick with the heat of public scrutiny. The visible passers-by around him adjust to this being part of their day. A man in a tailored suit checks his watch and tells a colleague a joke about interest rates. A young woman in a hoodie watches a video on a phone and raises an eyebrow at nothing. The bank's clocks proceed as usual. Bradley moves with the measured contempt of someone who understands his power and intends to use it to maintain whatever order he believes is natural. "He's taking too long," Bradley mutters to Chelsea. "We can't have him tying up the line." Chelsea's hands tremble slightly as she hands over a receipt to an elderly couple. She rationalizes, "He was alone, policies are clear." The sentence, "Do it for your job," sits like a stone under her tongue. Jerome's eyes flick to Wesley now and then, but he tightens his jaw and returns to the radar screen of his duties. Diane stands with her coffee and pretends to check her schedule, the steam rising from the lid in small clouds. Wesley counts the minutes the way kids count subway stops, quiet numbers that make the time visible. 5, 10, 15. Each minute grows weighty, like a coin stacked slowly into a tower. Sometimes he looks up and watches the clock, desperate for the arrival of an adult or an ally, and sometimes he reads the letter again. Under the fluorescent lights, the ink he knows by heart seems to glow with a soft authority. Off to one side, a pair of teenagers whisper something and nudge each other, their laughter suppressed like they are sharing a private joke. Someone leans his phone over the counter and angles for a better shot. A ripple of, "Is this real?" circulates in small, polite murmurs, the kind of curiosity that keeps itself safe behind other people's discomfort. Wesley's breath is steady. He does not raise his voice. He does not let the moment become the thing that will define him forever. He has seen worse in grocery lines when he was with Grandma Eleanor. People who turned their faces away. He has felt eyes measure him and write him into categories. He learned early how to be small without being less. His grandmother taught him that dignity was not in the velvet of your shoes, but in how you held the brown envelope. He knows, too, that the envelope is more than paper. It is a manifesto of years of sacrifice. "Sir," Bradley says eventually, and the word is a release valve for a system that needs to keep its definitions. "You will have to leave if you cannot provide verification. We cannot." "Please," Wesley says, "it's just to check my balance. My grandmother said—" "Your grandmother isn't here," Bradley cuts in, voice colder. "And the law, protocol," he uses the words as if the law loves him back. He tucks the policy into his breast pocket, an armor of procedure. The lobby's atmosphere ossifies. The people who have been watching adjust their coats and their priorities. Some begin to murmur about taking matters in hand, meaning they'd prefer this inconvenience go away. The camera among the crowd gets closer. A woman angles her phone and starts recording. The screen's blue light is a tiny accusation. A man whispers to his friend, "Can you believe this?" And his incredulity is not at what the manager is doing, but at this child's refusal to be invisible. When a customer appears in a town car, an older woman with a Hermes scarf who walks like someone who has never had to sit on a bench meant for the dispossessed, Bradley practically beams. "Excuse me, may I help you?" He offers service like a trophy. "Please come right up." That simple motion, speeding service for some and suspended access for another, looking small now but hammering at the foundation. It's the ledger book of a society written in human gestures. The teller smiles. The older woman's check clears quickly. The man from the tailored suit gets a confirmation on his screen and leaves with a nod and a tip of his head. The lobby's gears clunk forward. Wesley's phone buzzes. He looks down expecting a text from Lawrence, but it's only a notification from a school app reminding him of a parent-teacher night next week. He has learned to wait without illusions, but waiting can be a fierce teacher. It names the things people will do and will not do. Diane glances at him, then looks away. Her coffee sloshes. She thinks about the word complicity, without yet finding the nerve to translate it into action. Jerome sits in his little glassed-in booth and watches the ceiling tiles. He was a neighborhood kid once too. He knows how the cold of indifference settles into your bones. He knows, in that ancient corner of memory, how his mother used to brace him with the words, "Mind your step," like a prayer against falling. He looks at Wesley's shoes, and then at Bradley's polished ones, and for a moment the set of his mouth wrestles with the shape of an answer. The shift is micro. His hand tightens on the radio, then releases it. Silence wins. "Sir," Bradley says again, louder now, as if the volume will change the content, "you cannot be here without an adult to verify your identity. I must ask you to step aside. There's a waiting area in the corner for minors." Wesley moves like a man walking upstairs, each step measured and deliberate. He does not protest. He finds the small bench Bradley indicated and sits, and in doing so he becomes a display object, placed, arranged, and observed. Chelsea hands him a coloring sheet and a juice box as a performative kindness, a move that says the bank can be generous in its own image without challenging the narrative they've constructed. A mother with a stroller gives him a pitying look, the kind that slides sympathy into a pocket and pays for it later with silence. Wesley takes the juice box, although he doesn't want it. His hands tremble when he opens the straw. He listens to the lobby and to the way laughter sounds like small nails scratching on a chalkboard. People have collected to watch a thing they will later call a spectacle. Time stretches and the humiliation coagulates, a gelatinous thing that settles into the muscles. Wesley pulls out the letter again, smoothing the edges with his thumb. He reads a line aloud under his breath, not to anyone, just to himself. "Your worth is not up for auction." That line had been written by a woman who had worked 2 jobs and rose early to iron clothes for people who never learned her name. She had saved up pennies, wrapped them in newspaper, and entrusted them to the bank that now kept her grandson waiting. At a small table near the entrance, someone tweets. At the teller station, a receipt machine stutters. The overhead speakers hum with music that seems to make even indignation polite. The clock keeps its indifferent beat. Wesley counts again, this time in fragments, until the number is a small, private drum. A minute becomes a mile. The lobby fills with the kind of noise that comes when people choose not to choose. They talk about mortgages and weekend plans and the weather. They discuss stock tips and school fundraisers. Nobody anywhere is prepared for the moral question, who will stand with the boy? Wesley looks across the marble at Bradley and sees a man who props his identity on the privileges of pattern and expectation. Bradley's face is a map of small grievances that hardened into entitlement. He has made a career of keeping lines neat, of policing who passes and who doesn't. He is not cruel by definition. His cruelty is practical, domestic, the kind that has a policy number attached when asked to explain itself. He is the kind of person who mistakes systems for truth. "Make sure he doesn't leave," Bradley says after a while. And the sentence is not an order because he thinks it is morally just. It is an order because it keeps the spectacle from dissolving. Keep an eye on him. Jerome hears it. For a second, the notion of keeping an eye feels like salvation. Then it feels like complicity. He shrugs and closes the little window of his booth, his face a plain surface. He tells himself he will do what's required. In the waiting room, Wesley folds his hands and reads the letter again. The handwriting, Eleanor's high, sure loops, seems to pulse with a fierce tenderness. One line catches his attention this time. "If anyone ever tries to make you feel less than, remember how I counted each coin and how I chose you for more." Wesley thinks of the numbers his grandmother kept in a little ledger back home, the tiny notches and scratch totals. He thinks about the grocery store where she used coupons as if they were treasures, and about the nights when she hummed and mended while the radio played. He thinks about why she chose to leave the money in the bank instead of burying it in a cookie jar. Because she trusted, with a weary faith, that institutions could be places of safekeeping. He did not expect institutions to turn on him for the way his shoes had been patched. A child from a birthday party scampers past, squealing. Someone offers Wesley a small piece of candy and then moves on. The world continues to operate, blissfully and angrily, beyond the lines drawn for this boy. The 10-year-old keeps his voice low, speaking to the paper. He imagines his grandmother sitting across from him, as real in memory as a photograph left exposed to sunlight. He can hear the cadence of her directions. "You never have to be loud to be noticed. Let them notice you by how you stand, by how you speak, by the hand you give." Somewhere in the lobby, a customer finally records a video. A hand angles a phone. The image is grainy at first. Wesley on the bench, Bradley in the foreground, Chelsea pretending not to stare. The uploader labels it in the instant. "Bank refuses kid." The caption hooks a few viewers, then more. It starts slow, 10 views, then 100. But nothing yet matches the moment when the ledger would flip. Wesley's phone buzzes again, this time with a text from his uncle. 3 dots appear as if someone is typing, and then a line. "I'm on my way." No arrival time, simply presence promised. Wesley breathes, and the letter smells like home. The lobby's tempo shifts minutely. Even Bradley senses a small tremor under the marble floor. He smooths his expression into managerial control the way a stagehand smooths a curtain. "Who is this Lawrence person?" he asks Chelsea, who avoids the question by a practiced smile and a shrugged shoulder, the kind of avoidance that is meant to keep her safe from being judged later. Wesley stows his phone and tucks the letter back into the envelope. He puts the plastic card in his pocket. He closes his eyes for a moment and conjures the image of his grandmother counting the pennies like prayers. He eats another sip from the juice box, feels the stickiness on his lips, and waits. Outside, the street is a blur of movement, delivery trucks, cyclists, people threading through the city's quick, intimate exchanges. The bank's front doors whisper and then whirl. A man with a briefcase hurries in and is given immediate service. The lobby's hierarchy remains intact in the small actions of the staff, until the story's axis begins to tilt. Diane finally moves. She rises from her place as if something inside her has shifted. not with the clarity of a hero, but with the messy, halting motion of someone who has just realized a moral error. She walks to the customer service desk and asks for a complaint form. Her fingers shake on the pen as if she has not used it for this purpose before. She writes, in a small, deliberate hand, a line about discomfort at the treatment of a minor. She signs it with a name that is not one of courage, but of recognition. Jerome watches Diane and makes an instant of decision in his head. It's a small, tight thing. Be compliant or be human. He stands, walks out of his glass booth, and crosses the lobby. He approaches Bradley with a careful step, and for a moment the two men look like two actors deciding which script to read. Jerome's voice is low but firm when he says, "Maybe we should look into this a bit more." Bradley's reply is a practiced dismissal. "Security protocol," he says. "We have rules." "Protocol doesn't mean we humiliate a child," Jerome counters. The words are soft, but the tone has a crack of something new, an attempt at moral persuasion within the machine. Bradley averts his eyes and then steadies himself. He is adept at the smallest forms of professional self-preservation. "We do our jobs," he says. "We can't violate policies." Chelsea watches them argue and feels, for the first time in a while, the weight of the choice. To stand with a colleague, with the script of the bank, or with a kid who carries a brown envelope and a grandmother's instructions. Her hands twitch like a trapped bird. She knows the names of the procedures better than she knows the names of the neighbors in the block. She has been trained to follow steps. She has not been trained to feel. Wesley keeps reading his grandmother's letter. He repeats a line that has become a kind of quiet prayer. "Carry your dignity." He breathes the words into the stale, conditioned air. The phrase returns to him as a physical memory. How she would order him to pull up his shirt and tuck it in straight because others will judge you by what they see. She'd iron his collars until they were crisp, not because she wanted them to be admired, but because she believed that dignity is not something you wear for others, it's a habit you keep for yourself. 30 minutes passes, and anyone counting would say it was an eternity. The lobby clock ticks with the calm cruelty of bureaucracy. Bradley paces like a man who is waiting for permission from his own reflection to continue. His mouth forms rules into weapons. The people in the lobby shift their weight as if discomfort were contagious and they had a choice to concentrate elsewhere. In the corner, the small video has begun to gather eyes. A hashtag wobbles into being on the feed, something like #KidDenied, but it's still small, a faint digit ripple that nobody in the room yet notices. Outside the glass, a black Mercedes eases up to the curb, a detail the lobby sometimes registers as background, luxury gliding silently along the street. Its driver checks a mirror, and a man in a muted suit steps out, tying his scarf with calm hands. He moves with the kind of businesslike patience that belongs to people who know the currency of arrival. Back on the bench, Wesley tucks his envelope beneath his arm. He thinks of his grandmother's ledger, the careful marginalia where she had once written, "For Wesley, future." He thinks of the nights she'd stayed awake wrapping jars in newspaper and whispering numbers as if they were blessings. He thinks of how she would always say, "Money is a tool, not proof of your worth." That line steadies him like a hand on the shoulder. A small commotion ripples through the lobby as a woman holding a child points to the revolving door. She whispers to her friend, and the friend whispers back. A phone rings. Chelsea returns a smile to a customer, all practiced charm, and then glances at Wesley as if testing the air. Wesley hears the engine grow closer. He looks up without knowing why, like sensing a storm at sea. A car horn is muffled by glass. He breathes in and out, lengthening each beat like a metronome. The lobby's chatter recedes for half a second. Bradley's jaw tightens. Somewhere outside, someone opens a car door.
Steps approach the bank's front. A shadow moves across the marble threshold and edges, almost imperceptibly, across Wesley's periphery. Wesley folds the letter one last time and tucks it back into the envelope. He clamps his hands around it as if he can keep time from slipping. He listens to the lobby and to his own small heartbeat. He does not look at Bradley because he knows eyes can be bait. He looks ahead, steady, like a boy with a ledger of his own. The front door breathes open. Everything tilts. A shape moved through the glass, calm, precise, like a line drawn to correct a crooked picture. He closed the door behind him as if shutting out some smaller argument. The lobby air seemed to take a breath. If you've ever found yourself watching instead of acting, pause for a second and ask, what stopped you? Keep that thought with you as you watch what happens next. The man who had sealed the car door unbuttoned his coat with a slow confidence. He had the sort of posture that comes from being recognized before you speak. Lawrence Brooks walked like someone who was used to being introduced as Mr. Brooks and then gently corrected to Lawrence when he preferred it. He was in his late 40s, the kind of age that softens a once harsh edge into quiet command. His suit was subtle, no emblem, no branded tie, only the sort of calm money buys, the ability to fold power into ordinary gestures. He scanned the lobby with an assessor's eye. The marble, the chandeliers, the way people arranged themselves as if a social map were printed under the tile. At once he saw the oddity. A small boy on a bench like an exhibit, a brown envelope held close, a trio of adults whose job descriptions asked them to serve and their assumptions told them not to. Lawrence's walk shortened the distance between the street and the bench in 3 strides. He paused a respectful step behind Wesley and watched the boy fold the letter again and tuck it like a secret into the envelope. Lawrence did not make a show of it. He stood, hands at rest by his sides, and waited for the right moment to speak. There are people who announce their arrival like a curtain call. Lawrence preferred to be an unassuming correction to whatever had been arranged. Bradley noticed him last, which was the natural order in that room. Bradley had been watching Wesley as if he were a minor emergency. Any interruption was an intrusion. When Lawrence reached the counter, Bradley tilted his head as if to measure the interruption. Lawrence did not clear his throat. He spoke in a voice that was low enough to keep the words private and loud enough to make them official. "My name is Lawrence Brooks," he said, "Wesley's uncle." The name landed like a rock on a smoothed surface. Heads turned. The woman in the Hermes scarf paused mid-count. A man balancing a paper cup stopped his sentence. The glow of phones blinked a fraction brighter. Bradley's smile faltered for the first time that day. "I have an appointment," he offered, the practiced salutation of someone who believes authority can be performed. Lawrence looked at the manager for a long second, then at Wesley, then back at the envelope. He spoke directly, as one does when correcting a ledger. "I don't need an appointment to be present while my nephew verifies his account," Lawrence said. "He is here as permitted by this branch. I've been trying to reach you. The number Grandma Eleanor left is on file." Bradley straightened, the shoulders who'd been leaning toward performance pulling back as if defending a stage. "Sir, this branch has procedures." "Then follow them," Lawrence replied, without the heat of accusation. He pulled his phone out of his coat and held it up, not in threat, but as a key. He tapped twice, and a name flashed, then a series of messages. No need for an argument, only evidence that someone who cared had been trying to come. The small hum of surprise in the lobby folded itself quieter. People felt in a single instinctive second the change in balance. They had been watching a drama in slow motion. Now the light in the room pivoted and revealed a different angle. Bradley attempted the same containment he had used with customers all day. Rules, policy, protocol. But this room had just accepted a new variable. Chelsea's mouth parted. She looked at Bradley, then at Lawrence, then at Wesley, as if trying to read a script with missing pages. Lawrence lowered his voice and said, with no malice but a steel edge beneath civility, "Please pull up the account."
At the counter, Bradley's fingers fumbled with the keyboard. The screen was bright and official, the sort of institutional glow that can make a number sacred. He typed, then tapped, then waited. Onlookers felt the edges of the moment tighten. Breaths held, as if the room itself were waiting for a verdict. The monitor blinked and then loaded. Numbers scrolled like a secret being revealed. For a sliver of time, all sound in the lobby contracted to the mechanical tick of the register and the faint hum of the HVAC. Bradley's face, which had been a practiced mask, began to lose its construction. The figure that came up on the screen stopped everyone in place. 487,263. The number sat there as plain as a headline. It didn't roar. It simply existed, luminous and incontrovertible. A silence so complete it felt like a hand fell over the room. For a moment, everyone forgot to breathe. Bradley's smile evaporated. Where there had been performance, there was only a small, shrinking human inside a suit who could not easily reconcile his own narrative with the ledger. He looked at the name on the screen. He looked at the boy on the bench. He looked at Lawrence. Words, for once, were not the right tool. He was speechless. Not in the theatrical sense that drama teachers favor, the shocked gasp with a hand to the mouth, but in the harder, meaner way of someone whose entire scaffolding of acceptable behavior has been undermined in real time. There was no immediate deflection, no quick policy to hide behind. He had to reconcile his own conduct with a truth he had just been forced to see. His throat worked around rules and reflexes, and for a few heavy seconds, his practiced vocabulary failed him. People who had watched Wesley be written small now turned to watch Bradley shrink with realization. A single murmur broke the silence, soft, incredulous, beginning at the back and then passing like a pebble through water. The woman with the baby dropped her gaze. Someone clicked record. The lobby buzzed in a new register, astonishment, discomfort, an emergent moral awareness that can't be erased with a policy. Lawrence did not gloat. He did not smile. He folded his hands and said simply, "Is there any further reason this child cannot confirm what is plainly visible here?" Bradley stammered for a moment, a human sound that slid between the synthetic paces of the bank's machinery. There must be—" His words thinned into procedural muttering, as if he could summon policy like a shield. "There are verification protocols, sir. Identity." "He's verified," Lawrence cut in. "The account is active. The balance is there. What I need to know is, why was he made to wait and be humiliated?" Bradley blinked, searching for the person who could back him up. There was none. Chelsea's face was an open book of regret, and the rest of the staff's faces read like a slow confession. Patricia Edwards arrived as if summoned. She was the regional director, white, firm, and efficient, and she strode in with the kind of presence that suggested she knew the difference between a procedural problem and a reputational emergency. Her arrival calmed and sharpened the room. She greeted Lawrence with a tight professional nod and then, with less ceremony, turned to Bradley. "Bradley," she said, looking at the manager in a way that named both fact and responsibility. "What happened here?" Bradley opened his mouth and then closed it. The sound he made was an attempt to rematerialize command. "We follow—" Patricia's gaze didn't flicker. "Pull up the account on my screen," she instructed Chelsea, "and record the time of delay." Then to Lawrence she said, "Mr. Brooks, I'm Patricia Edwards, Regional Director. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Please tell me everything." Lawrence recounted with calm precision. The letter from Grandma Eleanor, the note left with the branch number, the attempted calls, the time Wesley had been made to wait. He did not make it about retribution. He framed it as a correction requested. He wanted an explanation. He wanted an assurance that this would not happen again. Patricia listened, tapping an index finger against a tablet. She asked the sorts of questions that unspooled facts without rancor. When Chelsea confirmed the timestamps and Jerome stepped out to say he had been monitoring for security but not intervening because of protocol, Patricia's face tightened into a professional frown. She turned then to the lobby, to the small crowd of witnesses, and made a decision that changed the tenor of the day. This would not be left in whispers. She would be public about it. Bradley Whitmore, she said, using his full name, the way a company uses a name when it needs to show separation. As of this moment, you are suspended pending an internal investigation. Security will escort you back to your office to collect your personal items. HR will follow up with you about next steps. The sentence landed with administrative finality. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He tried to say something, where his authority sat, why this was unnecessary, but his voice had no claim. The ledger had spoken. He stood slowly. The fabric of his suit creased as if time itself had pressed on the folds. He gathered a few pens in a trembling hand, gestures one reserves for the small holdings that make a career seem more than it is. The security guard, Jerome, moved, and this time his movement was different. It was engaged. Jerome's earlier hesitations changed into a steady, professional compliance that carried a personal ache. Bradley paused at the counter, and for the first time in the day, he looked at Wesley without the shield of policy. The manager's eyes found the boy, and a crack of raw shame moved across his face. He managed a tight, awkward apology, short, perfunctory, half-hearted, but it was said enough to mark the moment. "I'm sorry," Bradley offered, and it was unclear whether the apology was for the boy, for the optics, or for the grievous mismatch between his self-image and how he'd behaved. The lobby did not clap. People watched to see if the apology would be accompanied by explanation or change. Patricia stepped forward with the calm, managerial clarity of someone applied to crisis. "We're going to make a record," she said. "We'll take a formal complaint. We'll also review branch policies, staff training, and customer interaction protocols. Mr. Brooks, if you will accept our apologies on behalf of the institution, I will ensure something is done." Lawrence's voice softened. He wanted accountability. He also wanted repair that would last. "I will accept actions, not words," he said. "And we should include something more. My sister, Eleanor, saved for a reason. This money is part of her last care for Wesley's future. It ought to be honored and to become something that helps others." Patricia nodded. "We can work with you on a scholarship or a program in Miss Eleanor's name," she said, immediately turning a public loss into a public opportunity. In that quick, pragmatic way that organizations sometimes have, she began to name possible reforms: bias training, review of juvenile verification procedures, a customer complaint hotline given public attention, and a mandate that staff be trained to consider dignity as a part of service. Chelsea stood there, small and suddenly very visible. Her training had told her to follow steps. Her humanity, less taught, told her this was a rupture that required more than steps. Her eyes were glassy, she swallowed, and then said, "I'm sorry, I should have," and the sentence broke into corrective action. "I'll file a statement. I'll cooperate." Diane came forward when Patricia invited the lobby to be part of the record. Her hands were still shaking when she gave her name to the receptionist and asked that her complaint be included. "I watched," she said plainly. "I should have done more sooner." Jerome, who had watched his own indecision and felt like a small failure, stepped up then with a steadier voice than he'd used earlier. "I should have intervened sooner," he said. "I'm sorry to the boy and to his family." In that apology, there was a private pledge. He would change how he handled moments when dignity and security intersected. Bradley left the counter under escort while people murmured. The camera that had been recording extended its life. Pixels of the scene already heading into the cloud, into feeds that would strain the edges of the bank's PR office. In the minutes that followed, Patricia moved through the lobby with professional calm, taking names, noting times, and drafting an immediate public statement. Suspension pending review, full investigation, commitment to training, and to a review of branch-level customer interaction policies. The viral spike was slow at first, but then jagged. The grainy video captured the arc of the humiliation and the abrupt stop when Lawrence arrived. Someone posted it with a caption that suggested outrage. Others shared it with captions that were more thoughtful, asking questions about how institutions treat the vulnerable. Within an hour, the clip had thousands of views. Within 24 hours, the number had climbed into the hundreds of thousands. People began to see the incident as a symbol, less of one manager's failure than of something systemic. Lawrence, who had been careful not to make everything about himself, agreed to be the public face of a conversation about dignity. He issued a statement, gratitude for the support, a careful call for structural change, and a request that the bank honor Eleanor's legacy by creating a scholarship fund for students from neighborhoods where the chance to attend college is often decided by small, daily cruelties. The bank, with Patricia's influence and the harsh light of public scrutiny, moved quickly. Within days, they issued an official apology. A disciplinary process was initiated. Bradley Whitmore was suspended with pay pending investigation. The bank's board appointed an external review to look at training, escalation protocols, and customer treatment metrics. The decision to suspend a manager of 15 years was not casual. It signaled that the institution recognized the reputational stakes and the moral one, too. Internally, there were memos and meetings and staff training modules drafted and approved. There was a renewed directive on how to treat minors and the vulnerable. There was explicit language about dignity, phrasing that had never before been included on a bank policy sheet. There was some PR damage control, yes, but there was also a realignment of priorities. The bank would fund the Eleanor Brooks Scholarship with a commitment to match community donations. And Patricia announced a partnership with a nonprofit that would help students from low-income neighborhoods access mentorship and financial literacy programming. Chelsea, shaken by how she'd reacted, asked herself whether her job had taught her the right things. She began volunteering at the nonprofit Patricia had selected. She enrolled in evening classes for social work. Where before she'd filed forms and smiled on cue, she now found herself listening to people who had no polished shoes but plenty of stories. Her face, once practiced into a customer service mask, softened into something kinder and more aware. It would be a long arc, one of repair rather than absolution, but she chose that arc. She would later meet Wesley on scholarship panels and hand him the first packet of forms for the Eleanor Brooks Scholarship and feel more like she was contributing than performing. Jerome left his booth with a small, private grief for the moments he had not intervened and a larger resolve not to be passive again. He took extra shifts at community meetings, enrolled in de-escalation courses, and began to speak at school assemblies about the importance of stepping in. He kept his job, but he changed its meaning for himself. Where before he had been the man who watched doors, he became the man who watched people. His colleagues noticed, the community noticed. He was not a perfect man. He remained someone learning the shape of courage. Diane, who had filed her complaint and returned to the branch to speak with management, found in the process the kind of small courage that nudges habit into habit change. She joined a bank advisory panel that Patricia assembled to include customers from different neighborhoods and life experiences. She gave testimony at staff training days. Her involvement was private and public at once. She had failed in the moment and then worked to make sure that failure was not repeated. Bradley, meanwhile, faced the institutional consequences that happen when a manager's conduct is scrutinized in hard light. The formal review noted problematic behavior, a pattern of prioritizing patrons by appearance and wealth, and a failure to uphold the bank's values. It was a process of human judgment, imperfect, procedural, and consequential. HR recommended separation, and the bank accepted it.
His 15-year tenure ended with a notice, a settlement conversation, and a mandate to attend sensitivity and bias awareness training if he sought future employment in similar roles. The narrative of Bradley's fall could have been merely punitive. For some, it was. For others, it was also an invitation to ask why someone in his position had become so comfortable with small cruelties. Bradley himself, in later interviews he allowed with a journalist, described the moment as the most jarring of his career. He spoke in halting admissions that did not absolve him, but suggested a man who had been shaped by a system that rewarded small certainties over humility. He did not try to erase the humiliation he'd caused. He tried, clumsily, to understand it. What followed in the public imagination was a mix of righteous indignation and constructive conversation. The viral video prompted discussions in living rooms and editorial pages. Some people used the clip as a call to action. How do institutions train staff to respect dignity? Others used it as a mirror. What are the small ways we all let a person be reduced in public? The bank's reforms were not a cure for structural bias. They were, at best, a start. But they were public, practical, and measurable in ways that made them more than theater. The Eleanor Brooks Scholarship was announced in a modest press release. The university partners were listed, the nonprofit was named, criteria were drawn up. Lawrencey insisted the scholarship not be only about money, but about mentorship, pairing each recipient with community leaders and with a fund for emergency needs, so a student didn't have to choose between a meal and a class. He wanted something that would mirror his sister's careful work, saving not only for tuition, but for the small contingencies that make staying in school possible. The initial funds to kickstart the scholarship came from a combination of Lawrence's contribution and institutional matching. The scholarship bore his mother's name in full, Eleanor Brooks Scholarship, because Lawrence wanted her devotion remembered as an act of faith and resistance. He said later he wanted the scholarship to be what his sister had been, persistent, patient, and practical. In the months that followed, the bank instituted mandatory bias awareness training for all branches in the region. Complaint hotlines were publicized. Staff manuals now included steps on how to treat minors and vulnerable customers with respect and how to de-escalate situations with a presumption of dignity. The bank set up a community advisory panel that included Diane. The changes were small and slow, but they were documented. Patricia's memo, which had read like corporate housekeeping at first glance, sent ripples through the institution. Language changes can, over time, create behavioral changes. The viral clip kept circulating. Media outlets interviewed Lawrence, Patricia, Chelsea, Jerome, Diane, and finally, Wesley, though the bank asked the family to limit publicity to protect the boy's privacy. Lawrence complied. Protecting Wesley was priority one. When asked in a brief, carefully staged interview to comment, Wesley read a short note his grandmother had left and then smiled shyly. "My grandma saved for me," he said simply. "She wanted me to get an education. I just wanted to see the number." The story shifted from spectacle to symbol. People began using it in teacher training workshops and community forums. The incident served as a case study in customer service schools and in conversations about race, class, and the quiet mechanics of humiliation. Time, as it tends to do, moved forward. It wrecked nothing, and it healed some things. It carried forward small changes and left some deep questions still unsettled. 2 years later, at a small ceremony in a university hall, the first Eleanor Brooks Scholarship recipient took the stage and spoke about the difference between being overlooked and being chosen. Wesley, older and lankier, sat in the front row with his worn shoes hidden under a more generous pant hem. He had not forgotten the letter. He kept it in a lockbox at home and read it when he needed steadiness. The scholarship had helped one student pay tuition and another fund a summer internship. It had become more than an account number. It had become a seedbed for resilience. Jerome was there that day too, not as a security guard, but as a member of the board of a local youth outreach group. He had taken to wearing his little leather badge like a story of transformation. A man who once watched doors now watched possibilities.
Chelsea, who had left full-time banking to train as a caseworker, became a member of the mentorship program, offering guidance to students whose stories were formed in neighborhoods similar to Wesley's. Wesley, older and lankier, sat in the front row with his worn shoes hidden under a more generous pant hem. He had not forgotten the letter. He kept it in a lockbox at home and read it when he needed steadiness. The scholarship had helped one student pay tuition and another fund a summer internship. It had become more than an account number. It had become a seedbed for resilience. Jerome was there that day too, not as a security guard, but as a member of the board of a local youth outreach group. He had taken to wearing his little leather badge like a story of transformation. A man who once watched doors now watched possibilities. Chelsea, who had left full-time banking to train as a caseworker, became a member of the mentorship program, offering guidance to students whose stories were formed in neighborhoods similar to Wesley's. Diane had joined the bank's community advisory board, and she used her position to insist on public reporting of customer complaint metrics and on transparency about remedial action. Bradley, by then, lived the quieter aftermath of a lost job. He took a role in a smaller operation far from the visibility of his old life and spent a winter in counseling that forced him to reckon with patterns he had never questioned. He admitted, in a conversation mediated by a counselor, that he had built walls of rules and then hid behind them. He spoke about the moment of being suspended as a wake-up call, a phrase that sounded like damage control and like genuine contrition at once. Whether people believed him depended on whether his actions thereafter matched his words. Some believed, and some did not. The story did not demand universal forgiveness. It demanded accountability and learning. For Wesley, the ledger of his life had been permanently shifted. The balance on the screen had been a number, but it was more. Concrete proof of a grandmother's decades of small renunciations, the arithmetic of love. The account had been hers as much as it was his, a public validation he had a right to see. After the incident, people sometimes asked him if the day had changed him. He would consider and then answer, "It made me cautious of people who look at others as less. It also taught me the power of one person showing up." Years later, at a scholarship dinner, Wesley would stand at a podium not as a spectacle, but as an example. He wore shoes that had seen better days, and a jacket patched at the elbow in a way that made him look less like a symbol and more like a human who had chosen to keep his grandmother's lessons alive. He read a passage from the letter his grandmother had written. He read slowly, feeling the words as if they were a part of his own breath. "Carry your dignity," he said aloud, "not because they will notice you, but because you are worth noticing." The room listened. Some faces in the crowd had been the ones who had watched him on the bench that day. Others were people who found courage in the story and did small acts of kindness afterward. The scholarship recipients, many first-generation college students, came up afterward and hugged him. There was an odd symmetry in that. A boy who had once been forced into a corner by suspicion, now at a lectern, encouraging others to step forward. He wore his grandmother's values like a garment stitched into his bones. The viral video, though, had not been simply performative outrage. It had produced conversation and reform, but it also forced people to look at their own daily choices. Small acts rippled outward. A customer who once turned ahead now intervened quietly when he saw a teenager being berated in public. A teller refused to follow a manager's suggestion that a transaction could be sped up by skipping verification, choosing instead to treat each person as human. A security guard taught a de-escalation course in a community center. There were not enough reforms to claim victory over systemic bias. There were, perhaps, ever going to be enough reforms. But there was something else. A public ledger of accountability paired with private acts of making amends. The bank monitored customer satisfaction and published transparency reports. The scholarship matured into a small, steady fund. Patricia, who had been the regional director that day, kept her job and used her authority to push for more training and for regular audits of branch interactions. Her name turned up in op-eds about institutional responsibility.
Her work didn't erase the past, but made the future less likely to replicate the same cruelty. At home, Wesley kept the brown envelope where it would not be lost. The card he had brought that day was framed in his room for a long time, a small relic that reminded him of both vulnerability and victory. He would sometimes take the card out and show it to the scholarship recipients, evidence that someone had saved small amounts over decades and that small sacrifices add up. The phone recordings, the footage from the day, stayed online. Some people used it to criticize the bank, others used it as a warning to be better. The clip's comments varied, from anger to introspection to mundane memes about the lobby's muzak. It became, like many viral moments, a mirror reflecting all manner of human response. For Wesley's family, it had been a strange season, the collision of private grief and public attention. They learned to move through it with their own rhythms. Lawrence handling public optics with measured statements. Diane stepping into civic service. Jerome reshaping his career. Chelsea training to be someone who listens. Bradley learning, slowly and imperfectly, how the underside of his own practices had harmed others. There is heat to public moments, an intensity that can burn and then cool. In the cooling, the harder work begins. Tracking policy changes, keeping committees honest, following through on mentorship obligations, making sure the scholarship honored the specificity of Eleanor's life rather than the spectacle of her death. Lawrence insisted the scholarship criteria include applicants from the neighborhoods Eleanor had served, so that the money would not circle only pre-existing privilege. On a rainy spring afternoon several years later, Wesley sat across from a group of scholarship applicants in a community center. He listened to their stories as if listening were a skill in itself. He took notes and nodded and asked practical questions, not the performative "what is your dream?" but the useful, hands-on inquiries. Do you have summer work plans? Who in your family helped shape you? What do you need right now to stay in school? A young woman with a braid rolled up her sleeve and showed him a grocery receipt. My mom works nights, she said. Sometimes we miss meals to keep the lights on. If I get this scholarship, I can take a class this semester without worrying about next month's pay. Wesley slid the envelope he carried, a little extra of, some emergency funds from the scholarship, across the table. It was not a large sum, but to her it was a lifeline. He remembered the juice box, the coloring sheet, the humiliating waiting, the small things that compound into a larger invitation to feel small. He wanted the scholarship to be the opposite, an invitation to feel seen. Back at the bank, policies continued to be reviewed. Patricia's monthly reports included metrics and narratives. Staff training included role play with real community members. Some managers resentfully complied, others embraced it. Institutional change is neither tidy nor immediate, but it is real when practices are altered and when institutional memory begins to catalog dignity as an operational value. People will always make mistakes. People will always hesitate and sometimes fail to act. The test is whether those mistakes are owned and whether systems learn. For Wesley and for many around him, that test had been passed in small measure. The bank had altered its course. A scholarship would fund students who might otherwise falter. And lives had turned toward vocation rather than rebuke. On the 10th anniversary of the day in the lobby, the bank held a quiet ceremony to inaugurate the scholarship endowment in Eleanor's name. Wesley, now grown, and in a jacket whose elbow had been mended by his own hands, read a speech that was not long, but was honest. He told the audience what the letter had taught him about worth, about small daily sacrifices, and about the choices that make institutions better or worse. She taught me to hold my head right, he said, and the room laughed softly, because dignity and humor often travel together. He spoke of Jerome and Diane and Chelsea, of the people who had stepped into accountability, and of those who had begun the long work of repair. He finished with the line his grandmother had underlined, "Carry your dignity as if it were the thing no one can ever take."
He did not say the end. He said only that we each have small powers to make someone else feel less alone. Those powers, when used, ripple. They multiply. The bank manager's reaction that day, when a screen revealed $487,263 and a room's choreography was suddenly wrong-footed, had been the hinge. It made people here and now uncomfortable enough to act. It exposed the danger of obeying small biases. It showed what happens when a person with resources chooses to use them for public good rather than private advantage.
And it announced that dignity, while often denied, can be demanded and then structurally supported. If you watched the whole event and felt stirred, consider one small step. The next time you see someone reduced by assumption, step in, call attention, file that complaint, offer a quiet apology, donate to a scholarship, mentor a student, show up. The cost is small, the payoff is real. Share this story if it moved you. And in the comments, write one concrete way you'll act differently when you see someone else being diminished. Small acts make ripples. Dignity, as Wesley learned and Eleanor taught, is carried, not given.